Yes, hi, my name is Claudine Gartenberg. I'm a professor of management in the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. My lecture today was about corporate purpose, and what I really wanted to communicate as part of the lecture is how critical the idea of purpose is for scholars who want to study organizations and institutions. The lecture itself had two parts. The first part of it laid out the theoretical discussion of purpose, and the second part discussed empirical progress that we've made on the topic. So in the first part, it's critical to understand that there's really, when we say corporate purpose, there's really four debates that are going on simultaneously on purpose itself. And this is a formulation that's very helpfully put out by a professor of law at NYU named Ed Rock, who said essentially these four debates. The first one is in economics and finance, and that discussion is on what should be the purpose of a corporation. And when you think about that, it's really asking, should we reconceive the objective function of corporations given our understanding of what companies are? So that's debate one. Debate two, or discussion two, is in management, which is how do specific organizations conceive of what their aim should be? And does purpose play a role in what our work should be beyond just pure measures of financial performance? So that's debate two. Debate three is in law. And that's when legal scholars ask what corporate purpose is, it's really understanding for whom does the board serve. So who are the fiduciaries of, what are the fiduciary responsibilities of a corporation? So that's the law debate. And then the fourth debate is more of a political debate on, when we say corporate purpose, what is the role of corporations in society? And so purpose has these meanings across these different disciplines. Those meanings are related to each other, but the core issues at the center of each of them are slightly different. So that's the first part of the discussion. The second part of the discussion then really honed in on two of those four debates. The first one being in economics, which is what should the purpose of the corporation be? And the second one is in management, which is specific corporate purposes of specific organizations. And the way to understand that is, in the economics world, the purpose of the corporation is really asking, what should the purpose of the corporate form be? Meaning, when you think of a firm, how do we reconceive of the objective function of that entity? And so that's the debate there. And then the discussion in management is, for specific corporations, what are their aims and what should their goals be? And it's really, what do CEOs mean when they say corporate purpose, and how does that affect how companies perform and compete? So those are the two debates that we talked about in the first part of the lecture. Then we moved into the empirical side, which is to say, okay, there's really important discussions on what the objective function should be. Should it serve society? Should it serve to enlighten shareholder value? Or maximize enlightened shareholder value? Should it serve to maximize shareholder welfare? Or should it just focus on shareholder value? So that's an important debate. There's another debate in management that says, should companies come up with aims and aspirations beyond just, the business of business is business. And so then we moved over to say there's really very little empirical research on this and really very few facts on the table. And the reason why there's very few facts on the table is because it's simply very hard to study. It's hard to study purpose. It's hard to define purpose. It's hard to measure purpose. And it's hard to identify it empirically. And so there we talked about some of the work that I've done in purpose over the past decade, where we've said, look, we can't observe purpose directly, but what we can do is observe a signal of purpose. And that signal of purpose is, do the employees on aggregate believe that their work contributes to the community and has meaning beyond just beyond simple employment contracts? And if the employees on aggregate feel like their work has meaning and impact, then that those beliefs vary in a systematic way, then on average, that's a viable signal that those corporations have instilled a sense of purpose in the organization. And then there's studies that then you can measure it, and once you can measure it, then you can do work on it. So then a study that we discussed in the lecture today is, what you can find is that companies with a strong sense of purpose perform better in the future. They only perform better in the future financially if the middle ranks of the organization have that strong sense of purpose. And when those beliefs in purpose are accompanied by what we call clarity beliefs, meaning that their work has strong purpose and they have a strong sense of how to get there. So that's study one. Study two then says, well, why do we see differences in purposes across companies? Well, the answer to that empirically is it depends on the ownership structure of these companies. Companies with short-term oriented owners tend to have a lower sense of purpose. And one of the reasons why they do is they tend to govern those companies differently. They have different types of CEOs, they have different compensation structures, et cetera. And it appears to be at least in part a causal effect. So that's study two. And then study three that we discussed in the lecture today is that this relationship between purpose and performance is not always positive. Sometimes purpose and profits are complements, sometimes purpose and profits are substitutes, and it depends on two critical contingencies. The first is, do companies rely on R&D and intangible capital? Companies that are very R&D intensive, purpose and profits tend to go together. Companies that don't depend on R&D, purpose and profits are substitutes. And the second contingency is on ownership. Companies with long-term dedicated owners tend to have purpose and profits go together. Companies with short-termist owners, purpose and profits are substitutes. So the punchline of the empirical part of the discussion is to say purpose really matters. And it's hard to measure, but you can measure, a measure of it is the beliefs of employees. And once you construct this signal of purpose, you find that it predicts financial performance and it's closely tied to the governance structure of companies.